Let me just start off with a quick introduction. My name is Jake Westlin. I'm the Vice President of Policy and Communications with the National Association of Wheat Growers. I am based in Washington, D.C. at our office, and I've been with the organization for 5 years. I've been in D.C. for going on 12 years. I'm originally from Minnesota. I went to school at the University of North Dakota before getting out to D.C. working, where I spent my first 6 years there working in the United States Senate. So I was there for the past two farm bills, and I've been with the wheat growers since, like I said, for the past 5 years, since 2019. And I'm going to kind of go over a few things, including building on a little bit about what Rod talked about. But first, I'll touch on a little bit about who is NOG for those of you who might not be familiar, but and also touch on like what is the current status of the farm bill, how this might play into the farm bill, and what NOG's priorities are. And then I'm going to also touch on some existing like nutrition incentives that are in the farm bill that I think might help be added value, like this conversation about like what is already in the farm bill that promotes healthy eating, and how can we kind of leverage that past farm bill legislation to help future endeavors if this is something that the industry is looking to do. And then also kind of close with like the prospects for like this in a future farm bill, what sort of steps and groundwork needs to be laid between finishing up this farm bill and getting to the next one. And then also a little bit about what NOG's policy is, like how NOG we identify our farm bill priorities as well. So first, like what is NOG? So we are a federation of 20 state wheat grower organizations, including Nebraska Wheat. So glad to be here, and I think this is the first time I've ever been in Nebraska on NOG business. So it's good to be here before you all today. But our mission is to promote successful climate for farming in the future profitability for wheat growers in the United States. And obviously with a big part of that, like farm bill is the big legislative topic today, but we cover a broad array of policy within NOG. And we're a small team. There's 5 of us on staff, 3 of us who work on policy. In particular, I do your Farm Bill Title I stuff. I do trade. I do research and that sort of stuff. And we have another person who does crop insurance. We have another person who does the conservation sustainability portfolio. But that kind of covers like from a broad perspective, like what we do on a day-to-day. So first, I'm sure many of you are aware, like what is the Farm Bill, but the Farm Bill, it's typically a 5-year piece of legislation. It's an omnibus piece of legislation, which means there's a vast array of kind of different facets to the Farm Bill. As a grower, you're probably most familiar with like crop insurance, right? Like there's an entire title of the Farm Bill dedicated to that, but includes other things like forestry and nutrition, which helps create a broader coalition that helps get the Farm Bill passed. And the Farm Bill is never just called the Farm Bill. It's called something different every time. It's like the Farm Food National Security Act or something to that effect, right? It helps represent more of what it is than how we think about it in its day-to-day vernacular as the Farm Bill. So it's not just a Farm Bill, right? And the Farm Bills, just from like a process standpoint, they are, they're typically a 5-year authorization, but congressional rules require them to be scored over 10 years. So there's always just different ways that you kind of like think about it. So when you think about it in that context, it's like, how is the funding being allocated over those 10 years? So, it can change from year to year, ebb and flow as part of it. And just to kind of like round this piece out, like the most recent 5-year farm bill was signed into law in December of 2018. And, we're currently in this weird gray area where the farm bill has technically lapsed, but none of the programs have reverted back. And I'll touch a little bit about like what that means like in the future here, just a second. But we're still, hoping to get a farm bill done this year. Obviously, there's a lot of steps that need to take place between now and that actually happening. And as each day ticks by, that those odds go down precipitously, as you can imagine. But because like this is the legislative calendar, right? So we are where the red circle is on November 7th, 2 days after a presidential election, and the colors highlighted in gold, those are like days where Congress is in Washington, D.C. doing business. So you have 2 weeks, you have next week they're back, and the week after that. In that time frame, we hopefully get like a better sense of where we're moving, if the Farm Bill is going to move this year. Hopefully it does. I know like there's been a few articles, that have came out over the last 24 hours about, like GT is still optimistic. But again, like we're not going to know for certain until like those lawmakers come back. They have leadership meetings, they have caucus meeting to get a temperature and like what business do they think is achievable to finishing this year, and how they're going to prioritize that, and also what they wanted to maybe punt to next year when there's a new Congress and those people in leadership positions can kind of pursue that end game. And those conversations will happen over the next like week or so, but hope to get a better sense then. But the big star there is like that's a federal appropriations deadline, and so Congress has to figure out how to fund the government. Typically, their federal fiscal year ends September 30th, but it's been extended a continuing resolution through December 20th, and there's opportunity there, to get a farm bill done in that time frame and have it right along with another legislative package. But my point there is, if negotiation of the farm bill break down, that is like your break glass scenario where you can get another 1 year farm bill extension done while lawmakers come back in January and then start working to get a 2025 farm bill. But we're still optimistic and focused on getting a farm bill done this year. And the reason why is like this is 2018, and we don't need to spend too much time on this, but it kind of gives a snapshot. Like the green circle is what already happened this year. The House of Representatives, the House Agriculture Committee, they passed a farm bill in May, but in 2018 that was exactly the same scenario. And then throughout the summer, the Senate and the House, the full House and full Senate took action. Each passed theirs. This farm bill has been kind of within the theme of this Congress. There's been a lot of unconventional things that have happened, like you've had speaker fights, but like we don't anticipate the farm bill, if there is to be one this year, of being a traditional pathway where you have a formal conference committee, everybody kind of meets once and kind of like talks about all of the differences, and they come out hunky-dory and pass a bill. If anything's to happen this year in a farm bill, it's likely going to be in the sense that there's a compromise that's reached by leadership, and they just write one bill, and that's what it is. And the stuff that's highlighted in, I don't know, purple or lavender here, that's just was when the farm bill was passed out of each chamber in 2018, and it happened in December. So there's some precedent for getting it done in a lame duck session. That's what that represents. And I just kind of wanted to end that farm bill kind of overview with that context. And these are NOG's priorities for the farm bill. As I mentioned earlier, we represent growers, and what are the needs of growers. And when we identified our farm bill priorities a couple of years ago, it was crop insurance, your Title I programs, ARC PLC, working to enhance trade, making sure that conservation programs remain voluntary and incentive based, they're not mandatory. So that's what we are currently advocating for and working to get included. But there's a lot of obstacles to getting a farm bill done this year, but a lot of those come in the context of like farm bill resources. Like these things all cost money. Where does that money come from? The farm bill is intended, are the rules that are kind of governing Congress is like the farm bill has to be enacted. It has to be within the baseline. So that's why you have a lot of talk in DC about what the farm bill baseline is. So it has to kind of be within a preset number. So if you're looking to plus up something, that money has to come from somewhere else within the farm bill. So that can jeopardize traditional coalitions that help get things across the finish line. And that's just more like just general context about what are obstacles to getting a farm bill done at the end of the day, making significant changes. But there's other things like time is a barrier to getting it done this year as well. So kind of transitioning back to like today's conversation, how can we advance wheat fiber through federal policy? As I mentioned earlier, the Farm Bill, it covers 12 titles. So you could skin the cat a few different ways, depending on how you sought to do it. But like one of the ways that they do it exists, like one of the ways that the Farm Bill already incentivizes healthy food is through like incentivizing fresh fruits and vegetables purchases through SNAP programs. And that's one of the ways that there could be, a model, or not a model, but like kind of a precedent for helping get something like this incorporated into a future Farm Bill. So it's not it'd be a new concept to a degree, but it's not without legislative precedent either. And this on the side is just kind of like represents like the 12 titles, what the coalitions kind of look like. Like, right, there's like, you have the energy piece, you have forestry. Those are things that I don't really engage in on a day-to-day. There's not a, yeah, but we do dabble in a number of these other areas. So there's a few different pieces of legislation, including the Farm Bill. There's also what's called the Child Nutrition Authorization Act, which does also incentivize fresh fruits and vegetables consumption within school meals programs. So there's a lot of things that have been tried and tested out there in the past that help in this space that I think we can learn from a little bit to help help us think about how to build a coalition, how to broaden the coalition, and help lay a foundation for getting a concept like this included in a future Farm Bill. So this is the Farm Bill nutrition title, sort of summarized down by a number of, I have a slide and a pie chart in a few minutes that kind of outlines, you know, the whole encompassing Farm Bill, because you hear the number like it's it's $1.4 trillion over 10 years. That's how much the Farm Bill costs, and the nutrition component accounts for about you know, 75 to 80%, depending on what the participation in that program is, because it varies year to year. Because the SNAP program, you know, when the economy is doing good, you have lower participation. When the economy is doing poor, it rises and falls, right? People come and go from that program. There is usually like a static portion, like folks who are on disability or retirees who are on fixed incomes. They might be on that longer than somebody who is like of my age and just might be in a job transition, right? Like if you're unemployed, you would ideally get on SNAP to help you get with your budget. But there are two programs within the SNAP program that work to incentivize and provide like vouchers for individuals to help buy healthy food options. So there's, you know, the Seniors Farmers Market Nutrition Program, and there's also the GUSNIP program, which is the Gus Schumacher Nutrition Incentive Program. And each of these, so in order, like it's a 20 million and a 45 million annual program. And a lot of these are grant programs where, you know, I'll got a couple slides here to kind of illustrate that, but a lot of these are grant programs where USDA's Food Nutrition Service, FNS, where they will receive applications from, you know, a community or a retail chain of grocery stores to help promote healthy eating. So you might, if you purchase a like $10 worth of fruits or vegetables from the grocery store, you might get a voucher to come back, and you might get an equivalent voucher so you can come back and use that. So it's like doubling your money, right? So if you get assuming you keep that coupon and bring it back again, or you might get a discount on that. It just depends on how those programs are set up as part of that grant proposal. So they're interesting concepts and different ideas just to kind of think about as you think about how this could fit into the Farm Bill overall. This is actually just a better, I just pulled those out so you can kind of see those, since it was low on screen. But these programs have been part of the Farm Bill since the early 2000s. So the one that targeted senior farmers or seniors at farmers markets was incorporated in 2002. And then the GUSNIP one was 2008. So they've been within the Farm Bill for a little while. This is kind of just an illustration of from the USDA's FNS website and how these programs, it's a little fact sheet, right? So there's a number of different foods that can be incentivized. Whole grains is part of that. But all these are kind of administered a little bit differently. They are, like I said, like because there are grant programs. So you have farmers markets that can participate. You have retail locations that can participate in these programs as well. And you can receive those incentives in a number of different ways. So like doubling up your bucks, like through coupons for future purchases, discounts, or just get like bonus food items while at the store, like get a 2-for-1 type thing if you're like buying like a bunch of apples or something to that effect. And this just kind of re-illustrates that point on how the double up food incentives works. So you do get those matching dollars. And a lot of these are, in addition to receiving federal grants, they are done in partnerships with nonprofits and things of that nature. And when you also have the school nutrition ones, those are done typically through nonprofits or in conjunction with nonprofits as well. So what is like the prospects and how do you work to include this in a future farm bill? So one of the lenses to like think about like the future farm bills, like at least right now, is what is your baseline? So this is your 10-year budget baseline using CBO numbers that came out last year. And right, that's the number I had before is $1.36 trillion over 10 years. And most of that, the bulk of that is the nutrition title, right? Because there's about 40-some million people who participate on that in any given time, but that number goes up and down depending on economic indicators. And the remaining quarter is divided up amongst, your commodity title, your ARC PLC programs, crop insurance, your conservation programs. Those are the big ones, but then everything else like is less than 10 billion like a year. 10 billion over the life of farm bill. So you have your trade, research, things of that nature. But so that's one of the contexts you need to think about when getting or when pursuing new policies that cost money. Like you have to think about, are you going to bring that from within the farm bill? How do you prioritize that? One of the holdups right now is, the things that a lot of the ag community is asking for are, strengthening your risk management farm safety net, and that costs resources and that has to come from somewhere. So can you limit the CCC authority to help pay for that? Or can you get, budget authority from leadership to kind of deficit spend? So that would require waiving some of the congressional rules that exist. And that can be a challenge just depending on what the political appetite in Washington, D.C. is for new additional deficit spending. But some of the opportunities that this initiative kind of presents, like I was talking about earlier, there are a lot of programs that there's broad consensus on that and broad understanding inside the Beltway that incentivizing, healthy eating and healthy lifestyles does to the thesis of this conversation, help address the larger societal impacts on what healthcare spending is in the country. There is an acknowledgement that when this is kind of why those programs came into fruition in the first place, that promoting healthy eating can lead to positive health outcomes and reduce what a family might have to spend on healthcare over time. And building capacity for that on the front end can help with that in an even more exponential way versus how some of these programs are already kind of how they are perceived to help long-term changing their patterns, right? So like the fresh fruits and veggies program at schools, like the idea there is like if you get kids to start eating like fruits and vegetables at an early age, they can do that throughout their life, and that helps provide long-term health benefits. And maybe that also percolates back home. Like if a kid is going shopping with their parents, they can go, hey, I had that fruit at school. It's really delicious. Like, let's bring that home and get that at home. They might not have access to that, or they might be unfamiliar. So it creates positive health outcomes that way. But doing it by potentially like up on the front end, if you as a grower are growing something that has these positive health attributes or greater positive health attributes than currently exist, that helps has the opportunity to broaden these existing coalitions and potentially find larger support for creating something within the confines of the Farm Bill. So as you kind of think about this and position for the next Farm Bill, some of the things to maybe continue to talk to is like your nutrition groups, your healthcare professionals. I know we've had a number of them here today and on the Zoom, but also like other commodity associations. I know we were talking about how this impacts rice and how this impacts like the pork and beef industry and can help there as well. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think. But also there are a lot of lawmakers in Congress who have like personal passions on creating more positive health outcomes. And as people think about preparing the next Farm Bill, let's assume we get this one done in December for just the sake of argument and building a timeline out. When we get into like that midpoint, when people are thinking about like reviewing the Farm Bill, when they're having hearings about the implementation and what the future holds for like the next Farm Bill, and they have stakeholders coming in before the House and Senate Agriculture committees, there's lawmakers who might have like healthcare backgrounds. Either there are like quite a number who served in a healthcare role in their previous life before going to Washington, D.C., who understand this type of stuff and could be a champion for that sort of initiative as they want to carry that past work into their current work as a lawmaker. So there are folks like that inside the DC. And then also thinking about it in the context of like, how would it interplay and bolster existing programs, right? Like if you are creating like a certified wheat seed that, has these attributes, and then there's these other programs, they can be complementary to one another as well. So there could be opportunities to further build on that success. And those, double up bucks could be directly tied to these sort of products that may be labeled as such. And then also just thinking about one of the things that I've been trying to think about a little bit more in preparation for this is how would this impact USDA thinking, right? Like, and there's like when I'm talking USDA, I typically talk to, FSA or NRCS or RMA. Those are folks that I'm sure you guys all talk to, right? You know where your FSA office is. If there's ever a disaster aid program, you kind of talk to them about how that gets implemented. Or if you're working on a conservation program, maybe be talking to NRCS about enrollment. And those are folks that we are more familiar with. Like we're not familiar with as much with like FNS and how that might interplay with these other programs, right? But if we're thinking about it in the context of a certified seed, I think there's just some things that we need to kind of continue to think through and build out to make sure that it is, from a regulatory standpoint, would be something that would be easily implemented and can just have those conversations in the background as we kind of prepare that foundation, just to continue that conversation with people who work there and might be able to provide a good additional level of expertise in how that program could be implemented. And the last, I think I have one more slide. So at NOG, our general process for kind of like thinking about the Farm Bill, right? Like we're at this stage, like let's assume we get the Farm Bill signed into law. Like the next couple of years are going to be spent on implementing things that we have been advocating for as part of the Farm Bill. Some of ours are as simple as USDA has to like input a new number as part of a broader formula. Like if we're thinking about changes to like ARC or PLC, those type things, like, right, if we have a reference price change, that's, delete the 550 and insert whatever the new number is, like 6.25 or something, for example. But other things might require, a more arduous process, like putting together a notice of public comment period, doing a formal rule, that sort of stuff, or issuing guidance. Those things can take anywhere from like 90 days to like a year and a half, depending on the complexity of that policy portfolio or that policy initiative. So once that process kind of rounds out, then we do a little bit more of like a fact finding, right? So we will look at how these programs have gone. What are some of the challenges and barriers to, or what are some of the challenges? Where can we continue to see improvements in the next Farm Bill? And then we do, we might do some studies on proposals. We will talk with our policy committees and meet about what the future needs of wheat growers are, and also do like surveys of just broadly of membership, right? So, we have, our states are our members, but of our states, there's hundreds of growers in each of these states, or thousands of growers in each of the states. So we try to get as many survey respondents as possible, just kind of like better understand what challenges and barriers they face day to day. And that helps us inform what our next priorities might be. So we kind of put a package together, and then our board considers and approves that. And then we take that to Capitol Hill and, testify before Congress on what the state of play in wheat country is like, and what are opportunities for the next Farm Bill. So that's kind of, and then we, work to identify champions to help with some of these initiatives and build and be part of broader coalitions as well with like the other stakeholder communities. So that kind of just, I want to provide that context, as this is one of the early parts of many conversations I feel like that we'll be having between, now and the next Farm Bill, as we continue to think about ways that we can continue to promote domestic production of wheat, because, we got half the wheat produced in the United States is exported. But we also need to continue to kind of work at ways to build those markets here at home as well, with the domestic capacity and increasing that, and also trying to create more positive health outcomes as well.
We want your input about which parts of the value proposition do you like? Which parts do you not like? you find this attractive overall? And if this isn't enough, what would it take to make it attractive for growers? But so we have a combination of first questions that you have either for Jake or me, and then some conversation that will follow up with these questions. And we do have a survey on that, but let's start with the questions first.
First, I want to commend the work that is being done by this group because I think looking at it from an industry perspective, from just a long-term planning situation, we really do need to maybe focus more on policy initiatives that are going to give us something, a piece of the pie to make our industry more successful. I think one of the challenges that I foresee with all of this discussion today that I don't know how to work around it, but there was talks about contracting almost like for identity preserved wheat that it's going to have these health benefits. And so the challenge has always been from an industry perspective, just in the central US plains, we couldn't even segregate hard white wheat from hard red winter wheat because the infrastructure was not set up for that. And so I guess my question is, do you think that's something that this committee works on too as well, to set up an infrastructure to make that happen? Or do you think the industry is going to be willing to do that as we move forward with your large scale bakeries and mills?
So the question is a great one. To maximize or optimize high fiber wheat, we do think that entrepreneurs may want to identity preserve it. But the real answer is our goal is that it does not have to be. So what happens is this: we know that commercially high fiber varieties already have existed. In China, UMI 34 was widely grown. And then after they discovered it was high fiber. So the value chain accepted that wheat just as wheat. And the French wheat, which is where the second gene comes from, is Valoris. It was a commercial wheat, again, grown long before they knew it was high fiber. So in the French, which again, some of us have, we love French bread, but we don't necessarily care for French wheat quality. It was in their value chain without affecting anything. So the answer, that the way I would put it is, I think growers may want to identity preserve it. Certain customers may want it identity preserved to get the maximum effect. But there is no reason why it could not go into the commercial channel unidentity preserved, because there probably is variation in arabinoxylan already in our wheats. And everything we've seen so far does not require it to be identity preserved. And that's where it comes down to the question of, we really think there never should be a discount for high fiber wheat. We think you should be able to sell it. We don't want to have this whole process go and then have a grower take it to an elevator and say, oh, it's high fiber. Yes, it's more nutritious, but I'm going to dock you. That's absurd. I mean, there's no detriment to it. So it's high fiber wheats maybe in our marketplace. We haven't identified them, but in every other marketplace where they've been in existence, they never knew that they were high fiber and they were all still good quality. So Mike, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit? Because not everybody here may know you.
Mike Schulte, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Wheat Commission. And it does answer the question. And I'm not trying to be all like negative on it, but I do have concern because we've said at the Wheat Quality Council meetings for years, and for years we hear about what we need to be doing as producers to produce high protein wheat and how there's going to be all these advantages and how they're going to pay premiums for it. And then when we get too much of that in the marketplace, they decide that they're going to, not pay for that. And looking just at other things, I do have concerns about, they say that they may not be any concerns about it in the marketplace just in general, but is it going to be something that is going to be watched and then they say, oh, we have too much of this, we're not gonna pay for it. It is a concern from large scale milling and baking sides about how this does end up trickling down back to the producer.
So I think the question is wonderful, and certainly based on history, because a market pays for whatever it doesn't have. And as Mike has said, we've seen high protein wheat demanded in the marketplace until you have too much high protein wheat in a drought year, and then they start paying for low protein wheat so they can blend it off. In this case, we do think that there's no downside Now we have to validate that because, you know, part of the messaging has to be to get the value chain aligned. But if there's no downside to it, then I don't think there should be a dockage, nor should there be a perturbation in the marketplace. And in theory, if we're correct, and we have to validate it, the whole marketplace could go to high fiber wheat because it would be nutritiously beneficial.
Add to that one piece. As a business person, I hate that answer of we expect, I think. And what I'd say is that it would be part of the conversations between the wheat growers and the bakers and the millers. And that from my perspective outside of the industry, I see a lot of positives for the entire wheat supply chain to doing this in terms of celebrating the positives of dietary fiber and wheat. And as a business person, I personally would ask for a commitment that this is, you can talk about business and all the other terms in the contract, but if we're going to do this, then I want an agreement that you're not going to have a dockage for increased fiber wheat. If you want something special and it's super high fiber or whatever, you can pay us extra, but I would have a conversation and I would personally support having a conversation in which we say, look, you're going to get some PR benefits. You're going to get some nice things about wheat. That's your piece of the pie. The piece that you are expected to do is to say, no dockage. Assuming, of course, that the science comes out as expected.
History has not been kind to producers when it comes to these type of projects. Example, white corn. When it first came out, we had a big facility down about 200 miles east west of here that put in a nice facility. It was a good market for the farmers for the first couple of years, and then slowly went down. The issue with white wheat. Kansas had been able to raise white wheat for a number of years. We tried it in Nebraska, some being successful, some not, but it was manipulated by the company that bought it. And in some cases, one company. And so what kind of assurance will there be for a producer if they sign a contract? Will it be for so many years? I realize these are all details we worked out. But what assurance will the producer have that he can afford to make the change if you got to keep it on the farm, product identify, store it on the farm and ship directly to the end user? What kind of assurance will there be? And I'm sure that's probably hard to answer at this time, but.
I'm going to answer part of this, and and I think that Stephen has part of the answer too. This is one of the complexities. From a public health perspective, I think there's a lot of value in the public health just being, it's commodity wheat. You grow it, you bin it, you sell it, it's wheat. You get the commodity price. Hopefully you're in a good position and the price is good. If you're in a bad position and the price is bad, well then, you got to wait until next year. But no difference in terms of that. Then you have the separate piece, which is the identity preserved, and where if you enter into a conversation with a particular company for identity preserved wheat and saying, you know what, we're going to do this for the school children in New York City. I mean, just, making something up. And that's where those concerns come in and to me become very real. And that's part of the conversation, because if it's not attractive and they don't make either the price high enough or it's enough for years to make it worth the while, then the answer is, well, good luck, but I don't have any interest in being part of that. And you have a negotiation about it.
I guess I think in this way, Keith, we may be a little bit trapped by our history. High fiber wheat should be considered wheat, and it should be sold in the marketplace the way wheat is to be sold, if everything comes out the way we expect. So the incentive should be prior to the actual, the sale to the elevator, and probably as it goes up the value chain. So here's a couple of things you could think about. Arabidopsilin's not easy to measure. Okay. So, and it's not visual. I mean, it's not like red wheat, white wheat. Okay. So that's why we don't know what the arabidopsilin content is in the standard red wheat. I mean, we've done a little bit of testing. They're not as high as UMI 34, but we haven't tested many lines. So the question would be, if I were going to do an incentive program, and you absolutely need the insurances, the assurances, the way the incentive would have to be is for something which you did your job. You planted a high fiber wheat and you're going to sell it as wheat. And the elevator needs to do their job, which is they buy wheat. They don't discount it if it's high quality wheat, you know, if it's grade 1, grade 2, and all the other things, okay? Free of vomitoxin, that kind of thing. The mills mill it as wheat. The bakers bake it as wheat. Now, there are some things that they can do. The water insoluble or unextractable tends to hurt low volume a little bit. The water extractable increases low volume. So in Europe, what they do is they add arabinoxylinases. It's very common. And they take it from the insoluble to the soluble. So there may be some tweaks, but really it's wheat. You know, basically, the whole value chain is based on this is wheat, and it doesn't have a detriment or a classification differentiation. And also it's hard to measure. So, I mean, like you couldn't go to an elevator and get a 2-minute test and say, is this high or low fiber? No, it's I think it's 2 people working all day, and it's like 100 samples a day if you're lucky. Well, I mean, that's not going to cut it at harvest, right? No elevator's going to do that. So they have to sort of take your word that you did it rightly. And we have some ideas on how you could do that. Now, if you want to go identity preserved, that's a different situation. But I think this would just be bled into the regular stream and you would be paid for it as wheat. And then the question becomes, why would you grow it? So the incentive has to be before it enters the elevator. That's what I'm thinking. And the way we think you're going to have to do it. Now, this is my suggestion. And we have much sharper pencils in this room, much sharper pencils. Okay. I think the incentive should be on the certified seed. So that, you know, you buy the high fiber genetics, you plant the high fiber genetics. The elevator doesn't pay you for that. The incentive comes from those who are saving the money on healthcare. I mean, if they're going to save billions of dollars on healthcare, can they afford millions of dollars to growers? That's really what we're asking. You know, is the government smart enough to do that? And I'm not going to put a value or, I mean, that's a question, but I mean, but that's the thing. But the grower sells it to the elevator. The elevator sells it, buys it as wheat, and sells it as wheat. And what's the downside? The downside is if it's diluted, which would happen in a transition phase, you don't get the full benefit, but you still are getting better wheat than what you had previously. And at the same time, if an entrepreneur wants to IDP it so you can get the optimal benefits, they have every right to do it. But that's kind of where I'm coming from. And again, we have sharper pencils in this room than mine by far. But I mean, the question is, in a way, how can we foolproof this system if you agree that if you can save billions of dollars in healthcare and you want to incentivize it with millions of dollars to growers, how do you foolproof it so that you don't get harmed when you sell it, especially with the history? You know, that how many times do you remember when you had to have a falling number of 300 on white wheat? You came in at 290, they docked the heck out of you, and then they didn't have enough wheat, and they said, well, take it at 250 after you sold it at a discount to the elevator already. I mean, if that kind of thing happens, that's how you kill a market, right? So the question to the growers is really, if you have a product that is more nutritious, that has value, how do you foolproof it so you're not the one that's on the stick? if something goes south. You know, that they just don't, whatever, for whatever reason, they can't stick it to you. And so that would be the question. Okay, Ray and Ed, and then Ray, okay? Try and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name's Ed Souza. I've been involved in probably half a dozen IP programs. And I want to come back to you, Mike. I've got kind of a question, if I can put you on the spot. You've raised one of the issues, which is logistics. And almost every program that I've been involved in that's been successful has really had logistics at the center of it, right? So typically you're trucking into a point of delivery that's connected to the processing, right? You can almost draw a circle of about 100 miles around that processing point. Would it be possible? I mean, is this something that the wheat growers have mapped out where these logistics might actually work for something like this? I mean, the hard white program, I'm just going to jump over to the Colorado program just for a second. It had downsides, which has already been mentioned, but one of the things that was the advantage of it is the growers that participated in trucked it straight to the processing plant, right? And so for the growers that were within that trucking parameter or diameter, it worked. Beyond that, not so much, right? So is that something that could be perhaps mapped out? If we think about just how do you jumpstart this market, or the places that would work? Can I pass the mic?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I know for us and our part of the world in the Southern Plains, we are doing some smaller identity preserve programs just with OSU wheat varieties that have been mapped out where they have rail and logistics to do that. It is not necessarily taken off at the level that we had hoped it would at this point in time, but it is slowly growing. I do think it does bring up the thought, though, that as we talk about these discussions in policy, is this something that we could be doing with some of our other organizations? So for instance, the executive director of Nebraska, Roy Shanneman, also the executive director of Plains Grains is doing a lot of work with end use quality functionality work for the milling and baking industry here in the central US. Is this something we could be doing to map out systems with USDA and Plains Grains for an identity preserve program to discuss the logistics? I think certainly it's something we have to look at. And is that something we could try to implement on a policy side? I mean, I look at the corn and soybean industry and what they've done from a policy perspective of ethanol and how that was a big win for their industry 10 to 20 years ago. And you know, is high fiber wheat, is that going to be the win we need? Or are there other alternative uses that we should be looking at for wheat too as well? I think absolutely. But you know, I think when you're talking about it from a health perspective, it's better to be having the discussion from a policy standpoint than not.
Question. Thanks for the input.
Steve, the question, thing about what you're talking about on if the yield is the highest, there won't be any problem. But if your yields are less, then you're not going to be able to market. So then you begin to think about niche markets where someone can grow this high fiber wheat and market it to those people that are interested in their health. I don't know. I'm not sure if the government, how interested they are in the health. They're just know how much they have to spend on stuff. Maybe can the farmers develop a market where they produce this wheat and then sell it on their own to somebody and have a premium on it, but they have to do their own marketing. And that's, you know, most farmers have never been, they've been producers, never have marketed. So these are the challenges I think you're coming up with.
So I think everybody heard the question. The answer is we, as Rod said, we don't sell a bushel of wheat. We don't plant a bushel of wheat. We don't mill or bake a bushel of wheat. We're not going to stand in the way of any grower taking advantage of their opportunities. I mean, that's not ours. And so the question would be, as I understand it, if we had a high fiber wheat and we document its benefits to nutrition, any grower could develop any market they want. Okay. And I have to laugh because Dave Vedder, you're in the back of the room. And I would say the organic market has done a pretty good job of developing its own market for its producers. So, I mean, not that we would say that the only way you have to grow this is organic. No, of course not. This is high fiber wheat, can be grown conventionally, organically anyway. But the idea of a grower or a co-op that goes into it, I mean, you know, if you had a, let's say, Grupo Bimbo, which is saying every baked good needs to have 3 grams, 3% or 3 grams. Anyway, it needs more fiber than what they've got. Well, if Grupo Bimbo said, we want to buy it, well, okay. I'm thinking growers would be smart enough to figure out a way of getting that market. And, you know, Rod mentioned in the morning, which, you know, let's assume that America decides not to have any interest in nutrition, which I hope we don't. But how much of our wheat goes down to Mexico? And they have a completely different type of government than what we have, and they're much more interested in mandates. And they say, okay, all the imported wheat we want has to be high fiber, which they could do. Well, would we respond to that request, or we would let somebody else? My guess is we'd figure out a way of responding to it. Yeah, we don't want to give up that market, I would think. So I don't know. I didn't mean to hog the thing. Jake, do you have any thoughts? I mean, this is
Yeah, I think I have one still. I'm still mic'd up, but I think the government is interested in helping, at least because they've done pilot projects, not of this in particular, but they've done pilot projects in the food nutrition space before, but not like on high fiber wheat. But there is interest there to promote healthy outcomes. And if you were able to create a program that might give, you know, a rebate on a certified seed that was labeled as high fiber, like that, and that was just sold into either, you know, like a pipeline to Bimbo or to just at your local elevator, that if it was at a capacity, like that rising tide could lift all ships, like over time, right? Like if that became more of the norm through either like a pilot project that grew into a larger policy priority or a larger policy initiative that USDA helped facilitate through like a certification of these approved seeds. Yeah, I think that could be something that the government's interested in, because they do at the end of the day want to promote healthier outcomes, because to Rob's point earlier, like there is significant government spending already in public health, and helping so this would help over time, like theoretically reduce those costs. I mean, the population is going to continue to grow anyway, but it would reduce that on a per capita basis, right? Like that's kind of like one of the concepts here that we can, I think, look at, but also learn about what the grower concerns might be with like implementing that. Is that something doing, like, if you had a rebate, would that be something that would be of interest to folks, if that was a workable solution?
So what I've been hearing is that in terms of money, like trying to get money from the National Institute of Health, for example, it's just a different bucket that would be too confusing for people. But it sounds like when you're talking to politicians or their staffs, that the logic of, look, this should have a material benefit in terms of reducing healthcare spending, even though it's an investment here, that they would be able to hear that, and there would be a number of them that would find that a positive. Is that correct? Or
yeah, I think through those conversations like that I've had on, because in my past role working as a Hill staffer, that was always something that was of interest. Like when I worked on the Hill, I worked for Senator Heitkamp in North Dakota, and one of the things that we talked about in a broader context, and also when we were looking at the 2018 Farm Bill, was how can we continue to promote, you know, healthy outcomes through the SNAP program and also to the Child Nutrition Reauthorization Act. And at the time, like we were significantly focused on like superfoods and fresh fruits and vegetables, and how do we continue to promote those through incentivizing the consumers buy those, or that kids have healthier options at schools and get more familiar with their food, so that when they go back home, that they can, you know, hopefully, if they're not eating it from a diverse, like, they don't have a lot of options at home, that they could potentially like introduce more options at home or get their parents familiar with those. And I think there are a lot of lawmakers who are interested in how do we continue to create a healthier population, that we aren't having these, as many long-term disease and negative health impacts that continue to inflate our healthcare costs, as we've seen happen.
I see a lot of similarities between this and protein, where Advent Mills guarantees you a premium for raising protein. I think that's what this is going to come down to. A company creating a brand for high fiber convinces the American people that this is what you need. And that's what we're going to get as long as we can develop the fiber, you know. But that's the way it is with protein. And then pretty soon with the progress that people make, they're going to come out with a product with high protein and high fiber, and we'll have it made, you know. But I see a lot of similarities right now, this day and age, with protein. That's the way it is today with Advent Mills. Why wouldn't it progress that way with high fiber, that invests a lot of money in high fiber and try and make a profit?
You hear a lot of discussion about fiber in your diets and stuff. That seems to be prevalent right now. There's quite an ad on TV. They're pushing soluble fiber that you can stir it in your coffee, put it in your cookies or whatever else. Where does that come from? Are we talking about two different types? Is fiber in wheat or grains different than soluble? And or where do they come with? Where do they get that?
Oh, okay. You're ready to try to start with the bad one so you can look good. Okay. So in Arabinous Island, there is water insoluble and there is water soluble. Okay. Now, where the fiber comes from in cookies and other products, that can be all over the board. So like there's inulin, right? Yeah. And I forget, where does inulin come from, Andy?
Jerusalem. Yeah, Jerusalem artichokes. That's one source of it. But the Rabbitohs Island is just one type of fiber. There's a lot of different types of fiber that we're talking about that's in these plants. And the location and positioning of that fiber, and whether it's soluble or whether it's insoluble, that largely depends on the plant's genetics, to some degree the environment. But those are things that where the genotype matters, right? That's what really matters, is what line is being grown is what matters. And the distribution of the Arabinose island or other fibers, whether it's soluble, insoluble, whether it's in the seed coat or whether it's in the endosperm, that's going to impact the functional properties. So how that wheat bakes, for example, or how it partitions in other types of foods, that's where that influence is going to come. And the bigger question, I think, here is the high fiber content, the high Arabinose island content, going to influence the functional properties of the wheat? I think the jury's still out a little bit on that, but it looks like maybe it won't have a huge effect on it. And if that's the case, then how much of this can you produce, and how much of it actually matters if it gets commingled with other non-high fiber wheat? That dilution factor, is that still going to have the health care payout that you're hoping? That's a long-winded answer. Sorry, but I hope that answers the question.
And what I should say is that there are enzymes which will take insoluble to soluble. And the soluble is the one that tends to increase low volume from the data we have today. And we got to validate it in our baking system, because the European baking system is not the same. And the insoluble tends to make it less or decrease loaf volume. So that's why they add enzymes to take the insoluble and make it soluble, make the loaf better. That kind of thing. So now, did you have another question to follow up on that, Doug?
How is wheat fiber rated in desirability? Would you rather have artichoke fiber? Would you rather have wheat? Are we selling the right side of? Are we producing a premium fiber?
So Andy, you want to answer that one? Okay. So I'm going to tell you a story. And then I'm going to answer your question first. One of the things the baking and milling industry wants is a clean label. So when you look at your loaf of bread and it says it's 100% wheat, they can't say that if it's got inulin in it from a juice or artichoke, right? So they're going to have to say, we got flour, we got sugar, we got whey, we've got water, oil, whatever, and inulin. Okay. I think you have a competitive advantage with a cleaner label. Okay. So that's one thing. The second thing is you're too young to remember this, but there was a high fiber wheat sold in my youth. Now, maybe Keith, you and I can remember this. And it was high fiber, literally. And the funny part about it was it came out. I mean, I thought it was tasted okay, but it was made out of cellulose from wood chips. Well, as soon as it came out that the bread was flour with wood chips in it, that market, I couldn't buy it in the store anymore. I don't know why. I mean, it was okay bread, but you can make high fiber bread with cellulose. But if it comes from wood chips, people just don't think eating wood chips is what they want to do. Okay. So I think that natural label would help you. I may be wrong, but I think you would be. Okay. No, I think Chris had a question. Then we'll give it to Ed or Tom.
There are other fibers that have better documented health outcomes. Beta glucans, I think, were mentioned, which have really well documented health benefits. But wheat fiber, among the fibers that are available to us, is very high quality. You compare it to like a vegetable fiber, say, for example, that would be coming out of like a beet crop or a root crop. Wheat fiber is much, much higher. It's part of why it's such a valuable commodity to think about. And so I think, yes, we could jump maybe to like a beta glucan, but that would definitely have adverse effects to the milling and baking quality. It would get gooey really fast. So, I think as far as a product in the marketplace, I think it's one we can market, especially relative to other sources of fiber that are normally marketed like vegetable fiber. So I wanted to finish out the question, but because it's a good question.
That's a very good answer too. Thanks, Ed. Chris, you had a question?
Just a question I had, was anything looked at as far as what it does to flour yield, as far as, net on the yield? And then my comment on the variety, if it yields, people will raise it. And I don't know what it'll take to get this trait, or you probably don't want to call it a trait, but this enhancement into the current genetic climate for each respective state. If it yields, people will raise it. That's my opinion. But I didn't know. Well, I guess my concern is if it affects the flour yield, and to where maybe it's not as good a yield, could we have a situation like we had with the TAM 107 back in the 90s, where you had an area that had a yield that the end users might not have really appreciated in that area, as far as trying to acquire wheat from a certain region or something like that. That's the only concern I had, is if it did something like that to a market area.
For those that are unfamiliar, TAM 107 had a tremendous yield under drought, but it had very episodic quality, so that it was sometimes really crap, usually poor. I shouldn't say really crap, poorer compared to the normal wheat. And occasionally it was okay, but more it was that. So it was in the marketplace, it was a dockage, and that's what Chris was. Did you want to answer that one, Ed?
Yeah, when we looked at it, in the soft wheats, when we do like mill stream analysis on fiber and Ravenous islands, there's not really a correlation because it's two different types of systems, right? So milling yield, you can mill out a commercial operational mill much farther than our experimental systems, right? So they're already pulling some of the arabinose island, some of the fiber off of the bran just to hit the extractions that are in most of the flour that you would eat now. So it's not really playing into that factor of how does it mill out in terms of actual flour yield. Soft wheat's a little bit different, which is where we're doing mill streams, but in that case, we really do need to exclude that bran layer, but it really didn't affect the water absorption, particularly because we were looking at like pancake applications where it's actually desirable in soft wheat, and they could actually get the same high extractions with those types. I wouldn't expect it to be any different in hard wheats. Every wheat's got a little different milling profile, but it's not genetically. It's a completely different genetic system, I guess is the best way to describe it.
And what I would say is also in the commercial wheats that have been released, they have not seen a milling issue that we're aware of. Now that would be in Europe or in China. I don't know much about the Chinese mills, but I think Ed's right. To me, they would be your milling industry. And, unless there's a kernel characteristic or something funky about that, it should be same milling yields. Tom, you had a question?
I'm not sure it's a question, but it would seem to me that the critical thing, if it's going to go widespread, is to get a title in the next farm bill. Basically, rewarding producers for raising healthy food. And I like Steve's suggestion of, per certified seed label or whatever, so that, one can document that you actually planted one of these varieties. But then it's a question is how much per acre or per bushel does it take to drive it through the system? And I think that's what the growers and the commodity people have to figure out. If it's anything less than that sort of a federal title, then I think it gets commoditized. We've seen these in lots of grains. There's the, wet milling industry and corn basically tied to national starch or whatever the company's called now. And to get it, the public health benefits, it's got to go wide and deep. So it's not just people like us sitting in this room that can afford to buy a $4 loaf of bread if we choose to, but it's got to go wide and deep to the public. And to do that, it's got to be a title in the federal farm bill, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, I think, places in the farm bill where you could work to build that in, right? Like there would be, like to your point, if you think that is something as a grower, like if you had a certified seed and you were able to get a rebate on that, if that incentive is at the right spot and that is able to build that capacity, I think that's something that we would like to know and better understand, so that if we are truly going to look at trying to put this into the next farm bill, that is something that we can examine and kind of build out and get the coalition behind. Because I think from what I was talking about earlier, there's a lot of interested parties in the farm bill who want to see positive nutritional benefits continue to be promoted. So there would likely be opportunity between like growers, healthcare professionals, and others that could help, carry this water in a future farm bill potentially.
So the question may be, at this point, we've had a lot of conversation. What would you think is the path forward? I mean, we put it in the farm bill. That's one thing. But the other question is, as Tom asked, what would it take to make you as a wheat grower change? I mean, how many dollars per acre type of thing? And then we can figure out how to structure it. The one thing we've thought about is, frankly, incentivizing or reimbursing for purchasing certified seed that is documented to be high fiber. Why? Because there's no easy way of measuring it. So all you can basically say is you started out right, you did it right. And we're going to take our lumps if there's environmental effects and things like that. That's a possibility. But the real question is, if someone were to come to you and say, we have a list of high fiber varieties, we have a list of normal fiber varieties, what would it take for you to select from that list of high fiber varieties, as opposed to just all the varieties that are available? Because that's a question, and we may not be able to answer it right here, but we need to think about how do we get to that path? Because the last thing, you're talking to a guy can't balance his checkbook. You don't want me working on your farm, penciling out your profits, okay? It's got to be what would be right for you. So that's the key question. Okay, so the first reaction is it's got to be yield.
Yeah. If the yields are equal, then you have to play on the human wanting to help other people.
I guess I tend to be a little more skeptical. I tend to think I want to help human people, but I don't want to give up choice for free. If I have my choice of Rubidoo, which is a normal fiber wheat, and I have Steve high fiber, and there's no difference, I'll think about it. I'd probably plant my farm a little bit to both. But if I wanted to really make it, yeah. Yeah.
Ray, if that's premium is $25 an acre, and I'm growing 1,000 acres a week, there's no doubt what I'm going to plant if the yields are anywhere close to equal. That's what I'm saying. $25 a bushel would be what, 2 cents a loaf of bread? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that isn't right. Okay. It's $25 an acre. If you're getting 60 bushels an acre, is not very much. And if you put it on a per loaf of bread basis, it's hundredths of a cent. And I would think the federal government and the health industry would be interested in putting in a penny a loaf. I think you could talk them in real easily. The numbers work big money.
I guess I'll just throw in my 2 cents from this conversation that we started, a year and a half ago on what we're talking about now. Our farm has been in the Ardent Mills white wheat program for 15 years. And there for a while, they were playing with a production-based incentive program saying, we're going to give you 30 cents a bushel for your production. As long as you signed a contract at the time of purchase and all the way through the production scale, you knew what you were going to get. That worked great. Some people said, I don't want to deal with it. So 30 cents wasn't enough of an incentive. 1 year comes about and they jumped that all the way to $1. Next thing you know, we had a good year and they tripled their acres and their production, and Ardent Mill sat on 3 years worth of wheat that they didn't know what they were going to do with. And so when this came about, I kind of said, well, let's mirror what Ardent is doing. And I got to thinking on red wheat, it is the biggest commodity that the world raises. Let's get away from trying to niche, or I guess IP any hard red winter wheat. And so that's where the incentive of giving it up front. Now, I told these guys up front, I said, it's got to yield. It has to. And I don't want to make farmers sound heartless, but a health benefit is far in their mind on what it's going to get them per acre per bag on acre basis. So I don't want to make farmers sound heartless, but that's not the high priority. And it probably won't be as long as they are still trying to fight for a low cost producer. So that was the incentive part, was to do it up front instead of doing a production. Because as soon as you go to a production without a extensive checks and balances system, everybody just magically has a high fiber wheat and that they're delivering to the elevator. And so that's where that came from. And so I kind of went as far away from the white wheat program that goes through Arden Mills as possible and said, how do we incentivize that? Now, you tell me I'm going to get $25 an acre before I even drill it. Heck, I've got a lot of wheat that's not even out of the ground and it should have been 6 weeks ago, but heck, I've got $25 in my pocket. It's at least worth trying. And the concern that I had is when they started to come up with these crazy, or I wouldn't say crazy, I would say flamboyant names. Wheat is a commodity. We can't try to niche that and have any success. It's already been tried. I see like what Kansas has gone through the last year and a half. And I go, boy, I don't think we go down that path. I think that's a loser. And I said, if you have a bunch of folks that want to start or this high fiber wheat, incentivize it. And it's probably going to be something that is going to sunset on everyone. So whoever wants to jump in at first may get some IP wheat that they cash in for 5 years, 8 years. And then slowly you look at the list of breeders that are involved with this. If you have all of your public space focused on putting high fiber wheat, next thing you know, in 20 years, every variety may be high fiber, and an incentive-based program was up front and then tapers off. Now, for me being probably one of the younger producers here by quite a ways, that tells me that in 20 years, there may not be an incentive at all for it. But I think that's where the health benefit, we could talk about that to bring into it. We jump-started it, we made a little bit up front, and then we're back to a low-cost producer setting. And I hate to say that because that's taking dollars out of our pockets, but wheat is a commodity. Everybody raises it.
This Tyson brought up a question we've had a lot of, which is, and this is true of everything, because on our scientific advisory committee is Barbara Schneeman, who is the former assistant director for nutrition labeling and dietetics at FDA, former dean at UC Davis. And she said, once something becomes broad spread, the incentive disappears. And so if you wonder why we talked about resiliency, we could make every variety high fiber. And once you do that, nobody's going to pay for it. But the one thing growers do every year is determine how they're going to plant. And so that's why we brought in the resiliency concept. Why should the NRCS, with the federal government's weight behind it, pay for a low fiber wheat when high fiber wheats are available? So the only way you can extend an incentive is to say, use this wheat in something which they still want. And it's not that they want high fiber wheat, they want wheat. But you could, if you had good high fiber wheat, you could say, kill two birds with one stone. Cut your healthcare costs as well as make it ecologically better. And so that was the question we came up with. Now, I don't want to stifle things because I think you guys had some questions.
Well, I don't want to put a wet blanket on anything, but it's a good idea and I can see where you're going with the certified seed. But in the farm bill, what happens when another commodity comes up and says, hey, my artichoke seed has got higher fiber than your wheat is? Are you going to subsidize that? Or barley or oats or whatever you come up with? So how you gonna get it in on wheat? I mean, how's their thoughts processed to incentivize wheat and other commodities might jump in there?
I can start. I think that's going to be one of the things that has to be thought through, right? Like if you are making this proposal in Congress, like one of the things you're gonna have a pre-buttal in is this just gonna be wheat? Or is this gonna be something that can be expanded out to include other healthy alternatives that can be certified in some way, form or fashion and be applicable to others? I know we talked a little bit about rice earlier, like they're a major food staple that's grown here in the United States. So that could be an opportunity to broaden the coalition as well.
Yeah. I think the other thing is if we're going to sell this on health, we're going to want to have our wheat be as healthy as possible. And if inulin is something that they want to use, all power to them. But the point would be is we don't stop here. The paradigm is we can make our foods healthier without harming our growers, without harming our millers, without harming our bakers. So what do we do next? You know, that would be the way I would look at it is our goal should not be to say, you know, declare success, the war is over when we get 25% increase in fiber. What we should be doing is saying $700 billion is out on the table for healthcare. Our whole crop is 10 to $15 billion, $20 billion in a really good year. Could we get more? And what would that be? If you were thinking about, you know, once you get past high fiber, what's next? You know, that's the thing we should think about. Same way as at the foundation, we're thinking about, you know, we work on wheat because it's one that makes sense. And some of us have a bias. But at the same time, what should we be doing in corn? What should we be doing in soybeans? What should we be doing in the crops that we grow in here? What should we be doing here in Oklahoma with cottonseed oil? That kind of thing. You know, these are the types of things that we should, you know, the paradigm is not to make one crop get a minor benefit for health. The paradigm will be to say food for health. We're going to use the best genetic resources available and the best skill set to make our foods healthier so that our food will do really better.
And I think that comes back to this long-term benefit, right, that you're talking about, because I see that a peak and then whoops, there it goes. If you can figure out a way to get this on a label, right? If you can get that label onto the bread or onto the product, right? Heart healthy or whatever it might be. And you heard Catherine Krell's talking about adding these other trades in. This is just the first step, the first trade. But generating that revenue or generating that value, adding that value by having a claim like that you can make, that's definitely one step. Step two, which is probably much more difficult, is it possible to have a new category of labeling from FDA? That's a whole nother endeavor, right? But if you were able to have another level of labeling, so it's not a drug for sure, there's a level of substantiation in terms of the efficacy that this really does reduce disease incidence, then is there a claim that could be made with that that will add value as well? I mean, there's just these other ways you have to think of that we can potentially add value to what's being grown.
Any other comments on this? Because I think the key thing we need to think about, I don't think we're going to be able to come up with a plan as to what incentives you absolutely have to have right now, but we need a process. So if we all write to the distinguished group that's here, you're going to help us develop that process as to what you think would motivate a grower to accept that change. Because the next topic, if you look on your agenda, is how do we communicate that to those not inside the room? You know, and I have to admit, every grower I know has a good memory. And every grower, better than mine, every grower I know has lived long enough to see things that really make them remember. You know, as Keith was talking about the white wheat, I remember growers that had 293 on a white wheat, and company that contracted them voided the contract because it was less than 300, and then later came back, needed more, and bought it at 250 after they lost all the value and the like. So we need to figure out ways of answering, you know, how should we, you've asked fantastic questions. My guess is your peers will ask the same questions. How do we go about answering those questions in advance so that when your peers come in, they'll come up with different questions? But I mean, the next thing is, how do we communicate this to other growers? Because, you know, Nebraska's not going to be the tail that wags the dog. We're going to need, you know, a group to get together to say, hey, this makes sense. Are there things that you'd like to have us do when it comes to preparing conversations with others?
The only comment I'd make about that is we've got to get the millers and bakers on board early, and it'll have to be driven by them, I think. If they come up with products that are selling well, that are part healthy, or, you know, whatever kind of a label they put on that, that will drive the action. Now, how, you know, the particulars of it are a little bit hard for me to envision yet, but you got to have the bakers and the millers involved to make anything happen.
I just wanted to say I completely agree with that. And one of the thoughts, you know, we've talked about what we need to do to incentivize the producer, and we've talked about the milling aspects of it. But I guess my question is, have we really been doing the studies on like flavor profile analysis, and if it's palatable, and so it can be done, and that's not, I mean, that's just not an issue then, I guess. It's
Yeah, so the short answer to that one is, okay, so here are the questions that we want to have people discuss.
Let's get this one first.
Okay, but anyway, but Mike, your question is great, and the answer is that's on our plan, because we know that question's coming and we know we have to have an answer. And the presumption is that it should not affect flavor profiles based on all the past data. But if I were a miller or a baker, I'd want to see data in here on our baking methods, probably in their own baked labs, you know, and we have to provide sample sizes to do that and things like that. I think the main thing we have to do is to alert them, have them ready, and have them tell us exactly what they need. And I'll give you a very good question, a very good thing that came up. One of the major bakeries said, you're measuring fiber in the flour. What happens when you bake it? And the answer is, we don't have the hard data. We're getting that as we speak right now. But the answer will be, we'll be totally transparent. We're doing the test. We'll show them how we did it, and they will get that answer. Then they can come back to us and say, this is good or this is bad. But all of those questions we need to lay out, because if you know, we have roughly, if it's new varieties, we have probably 5 years before they really start hitting the market. If there's something like, you know, there's alleles and present in our wheats, we may have a higher fiber wheat we don't know about. That can happen quicker. But we need to get those questions laid out now. And we need to get the tests so that, you know, I mean, actually what I would prefer is a baker to say, I will bake it for you to see if it makes that difference. And, you know, to say, okay, I want to be part of this. If, you know, if it works and it helps nutrition, I want that on my label. And the example, maybe a good one would be resiliency. I'm amazed, you know, Nathan, who I have high regard for, is out at the Nature Conservancy. And what you don't know is that Nathan went ahead, or not Nathan, but the Nature Conservancy went ahead, and they've signed an agreement with, I think, Walmart and Target and everything else, because they all want to be part of resiliency. They want to have that as part of their reputation. Well, I mean, I don't think of Walmart necessarily as being a champion of ecology, but they want to be there. Now, Jake, I think you have to head back to Omaha, right? So let's give Jake a big hand of applause. Thank him for being here before, and we want to make sure you have safe travel. So I hope you had a good meal or two while you're in Nebraska, Jake. You bet. Absolutely.
The only thing I would add to my statement previous, and you brought up the ideas, is retailers need to be involved also, because a lot of that stuff will be driven. They can have, you know, ad campaigns based on that sort of thing. And I think everybody in the supply chain has to be involved in it to make it work.
And let me just say one thing about that. Everyone in the supply chain must be involved. Anyone in the supply chain, if the millers say, I hate this, they essentially have a veto. That's just clear, right? One of the key things though is the timing. And there's different people that are going to be attracted at different times. Right now, if you talk about, you know, we're a few years out from having it delivered. Farmers are really farsighted. 4 or 5 years out and you go, okay, well, I can understand that. The innovation pipelines are like 2.5 years for like a baker. Public relations pipelines are long-term though. And so what we can expect to see is that organizations, parts of organizations that have a longer timeline in terms of what they're looking at, they're going to be the first ones that engage. You know, Grupo Bimbo has a commitment for 2030. So they have a long timeline to look at things like this. And so we can expect that as we dig into the detail, you'll find, oh, okay, public relations people at company A, B, or C begin to engage and go, this is really cool, and I'm happy to do that. And then as you get closer, that's when you're likely to get the bakers going, oh, well, you know what, I can bake a rye loaf with extra sesame seeds and blah, 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 and I'm going to brand it with red, green, and purple, whatever it is. But that's likely to be a little bit later in the process. Whereas it's kind of an interesting process as people who are forward looking begin to get attracted first, and then you have a process over time.
So the other thing I should mention to you is we could use your help on if you have contacts on who to reach out to. So like in this process, at least I didn't know this, maybe Rod did. The culinary schools train a tremendous number of dietitians. And so the Southeast Community College Culinary School is in the public health meeting room right now because they educate a whole ton of chefs and they carry these things forward. What's the group that is it at Villanova that has what was the group?
It's Rutgers University has a
PhD program in dietitians and food. The Nebraska Dietitians Association has been extremely helpful in trying to get the message out. Candidly, we discovered we should have had continuing education units. They had done that, it would have been very attractive to them, as would be the medical field. So, but, think about who we should reach out to. We've reached out to the major medical societies. They're a little bit siloed. We've reached out to the Nebraska Grocers Association precisely because they've got to be in it. They've been very helpful. I don't think any of them could attend. We've reached out to Hy-Vee, which is our local one, and we've met with their dietitians. And actually, some of you have, pardon me, Marvin, I don't mean to steal this, but this is something which they put out on fiber, and I wanted that here because it shows you that our local grocery store highlights fiber and the need for fiber, and it reinforces our message. So that's that. The February meeting will be right in front of the major mills and bakers all coming to Kansas City. So we're trying to get them in the line. We haven't done particularly well with elevators, but we need to perhaps talk. But again, our hope is that it doesn't have to be segregated unless an entrepreneur wants to segregate it. But if we're missing a segment, and the Nebraska Cancer Coalition is here. They were very gracious to come. They have a lot of ideas and a lot of things we should be looking at. Like in their case, colorectal cancer is something which is important to them that this may have a benefit on. It's clearly not my area of expertise, but if there's people that you know of that you'd like us to reach out to, this is something where we can try to make sure that they get familiar with it. That kind of thing. Because I think that's right. I mean, we have to do the full value chain. There's absolutely no question about that. And I guess I keep getting surprised at what parts of the value chain I didn't know really were impactful. And I must admit, the dietitians and the culinary skills schools surprised me at how many people they educate, how many people are in the workforce, how valued they are, how much they train in nutrition, because that's critical for them. And you think about it, if we could go into the hospital dietitians group or the elder care or, school lunch programs, these types of things, the impact you could have would be massive. We just need to figure out how to do these types of things. And I must admit, my limited scope of friends is not big enough to capture it all, but collectively a group like this might have a few more that we should be talking to. as well as growers. I mean, I love Tyson because Tyson has to represent the growers on our board. And I think Tyson, you always feel like, well, I'm one grower. I don't want to speak for everybody, you know, but one's better than none. And Tyson's very good. Okay, so Rod, what else?
So I'd like to switch to the specific concrete next steps section. If we did something where people were filling stuff out on their phone, how many people would find that useful versus just having a conversation about it? Just a process perspective. Would you prefer to we talk about it, or that we have brainstorming, but you'd have to use phones, or you'd have to use a neighbor's phone, or work in pairs? Either way? All right, let's go ahead and do that. Okay. We want to come out of here with a real concrete plan. Next steps. Basically, the first step is brainstorming concrete things that we can do. And in a brainstorm, any idea is good, right? So, hey, you know what? We could go ahead and talk to Jimmy down the street and maybe he's got an idea. Now, that may be a horrible idea, but if someone else sees that idea and they go, well, maybe it's not Jimmy, but it's such and such, that really is a good idea. That idea about Jimmy is a good one. So we really want to capture people's ideas. In the second step, we're going to prioritize among the different brainstormed ideas. So there is this survey, and it has basically at the top of it, it'll have a list of ideas. You know, U.S. policy, export market demand and policy, traditional demand and underserved communities, resilience programs, translating learning to beyond weight opportunities, and other. And what you can do is you can click on one of these. When you click on it, what you'll see down below, if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see all the ideas that are already listed in that category. So for example, on the export market side, someone might have entered, you know what, you should probably talk to U.S. Wheat Associates. Okay, that that makes sense to make sure that we coordinate there. And someone else might have said, you know, the Japanese Department of Agriculture has a special program around wheat, and we should talk to them. And you'll see a list of ideas that are already there, and you can look at them. And if you have one that you'd like to add to that list, you just go down to the bottom and you enter the idea, you type it in, and you hit enter. And you will just go, and your name and organization is optional. And then you click go on, do you have more ideas? Click yes. And then you come back here and you can look through all the different areas. And we'd just like to take some time where you brainstorm and you just see, what ideas do you have? And then once we're done with this, we'll go through and have a voting session in which basically everyone will have 8 votes, and you'll get to vote for ideas that you think are really important that we do follow up with. Does that first step make sense? Okay, so this is where the location of the survey, if you to either take a picture of that or you go to that website location. Here are the ideas that people came that were added, and I have my apologies if I've messed up any of the ideas that you came up with, but I did combine some of them. But there are these 13 ideas. For example, discuss policy with NOG and Congress, support certified seed, garner federal funds to educate consumers about health benefits of high fiber wheat, etc. And for this exercise, everyone is going to have 8 votes. And you can put all 8 votes on one idea if you want. If you think, talk to major commodity and livestock organizations is really central that we do that, and we do that now, and we do that, before anything else. Then you put 8 votes against that. Or you can put, 1 vote against 8 of the different ideas, or whatever combination, anything in between. And what we'd like you to please do is take one of the notepads, the pages from the notepads, Yes, if you don't have it, Dr. Benziger will provide you a notepad and write down the most, please make at least the number legible. I know that I have absolutely horrendous handwriting and you cannot read anything that I write, but please, if you can at least make the number of the idea legible, and then make sure that you write how many of your 8 votes you put against that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Could you change that? Could you correct that? Thank you, Mike. So you can choose however many to vote for. You have 8 votes to make. It's like you have $8 and you can choose to put all $8 on one idea or $1 on 8 ideas. You can't put 50 cents on 16 though. That's not allowed.
If you see, or as many, I mean, you could vote all 8 on one. If you think one's just the knock it out of the park, but you got to sum to 8 or less, 8 or less. I mean, if there's only 4 good ideas and you only want to give them 1 vote each, you get 4 votes, but you have up to 8.
Reflection that every vote counts. Yes, I know I can't read that far very well. Yeah. All right, thank you very much. So we will let the voting machines do some of their work. And during that time, we would appreciate, we wanted to put some special focus on how do we communicate effectively with farmers? Because it's really, really critical that, I mean, this is, we're talking about first and foremost delivering value for farmers as the way to, as the path to delivering increased health to communities. So if you could talk, either you can do this up by yourself or you can do this with someone that's close to you and just talk about it. But we'd really appreciate some specific input about what is the best way or the right way to communicate to farmers about the Coalition for Grain Fiber and other increased nutrient efforts. What would be the wrong way and things that we should avoid doing? Because we really would significantly value your input about that, because every community, every group has a way that they like to communicate and that they appreciate, and other ways that they don't appreciate. And we particularly value your input on how do we do this right. If you do this as a group, or if one person could put some of the at the end, perhaps just it's another survey, but just filling in the ideas that you have that are really most resonant, that you think it's really critical that we align with. That would be great. And we'll see what we get on the voting here. So in terms of what were the results of the voting? Question number 1, discuss policy with NOG and Congress. 10 votes. Question 2, certified seed support, 9 votes. 3, garner federal funds, 12 votes. Discuss and align on project support with influencers for target communities, 11 votes. And question 5, develop coherent plan is 9 votes. All told, this first category of things got 10, 19, 51 votes on this section. This group about export markets, there were 4 votes for each for 6 and 7. There were 9 votes for 8, and which sound like, within this one was the highest one. Number 9 had 1 vote. It was a smaller portion of the votes overall. In terms of the third category, 10, 11, and 12, 10 had 6 votes, 11 had 8, and 12 had 5. So this was also kind of a middling, middling set of votes. And then 13, 14, and 15 got 1, 3, and 2 votes, which was the smallest number. So we'll go ahead and summarize it and think through it. Any comments, any questions? Is it in a completely, is this completely crazy relative to what you would have expected? Yeah, it's basically, I mean, there are differences between 1 through 5, but they're not material. I mean, it's basically each 1 through 5 got basically 10 votes. It's between 9 and 13. And then group 2 got, well, this one got the most, but it sounds like on export markets, you're more comfortable going overall, going through the end users on top of that, in terms of that. And then there was a middling, these 3 had similar sets of votes, about 6-ish each. So it was like 10 votes for each of these, 6 for each of these. Aligning with end users on the export market was the basic, what I get just on a really quick rundown. Does that seem to make sense though? Hope so. We'll go ahead and get some feedback specifically after we do this, but that was the end of the votes. Appreciate the input on the communication. Is there someone now, because we're going to go ahead and get some input from the people coming back from the other room, and we need a summary of what happened in this room. Anybody interested in providing the summary of that? We're not going to force somebody. This isn't like a college class. Is somebody maybe you deserve to be the volunteer. We need a volunteer to summarize some of what we did this afternoon and what we learned from that, because we're going to just have a quick of what did each of the rooms focus on so that you understand what everybody else was talking about. And then, do you want to be that, Mike? We'll see about that. All right. Is there anyone who was in the other room? Who was in the other room? Okay. Oh, they're still over there. They had some technical issues, so they're just wrapping up. Okay, well then let's wait a couple minutes until they come back, because I see the first people coming back. So let's just break until they come back. Then we'll just have a short summary, and then we'll go from there.
Oh, well, Rodney, I joined the other group, but they already finished the discussion, so I came back to this. But I did post my choices for the survey that you said, so your result might need to be, might not have a couple of other people, so just letting you know.
Okay. Thank you, Rose.
My pleasure.
Okay. Well, I think we want to wrap up. I think we have, yeah, let's just go ahead and get people in. We're just going to wrap up, get a summary. All right. So we'd like to just summarize, because we had the question about, okay, did the other group have the same questions as this group had? And the answer is no. Actually, we had 2 quite different sessions. And so just to get a sense of what types of other perspectives people have about this, I think that we'll go through and just provide some background on what was some of the conversations that we had. So in this room, this was mainly growers and people interested in farm interests and economics. And we began with a conversation about the economics for increased fiber wheat from a farmer's perspective. Is this something that could be of interest? And we had a lot of good questions about risks and opportunities. There was, I think, some good conversation with Jake Westlin, who is from the National Association of Wheat Growers, and he's their, I'm not sure if it's a chief title is, yeah, he's the responsible for policy. He's the one that meets with all of the folks on Capitol Hill. And some of the things that I got from it were that there's a lot of good work to be done still to make sure that we manage potential risks from a grower's perspective, and that we have the right conversations with farmers and about ensuring that they have the financial incentive to do this, and that the risks are managed so that it becomes an intelligent business decision for them to do that. And whether those risks are that the yield on the increased fiber wheat is lower than we expect it to be, or it's a risk that someone provides an incentive to grow it, and then somehow that contract becomes twisted and you end up with a tiny amount of money. You invest in shifting the kind of wheat that you've got, and it lasts for too short a period of time. That really we systematically go through and have the conversations to make sure we understand what are the goals, what are the risks. In terms of the policy, some of the key things that I got from the conversation with Jake is that there is interest among potential members of Congress who recognize the argument that, look, investing in healthier food can save us money, and that is not a crazy idea. It's something that there are members of Congress that can get behind and can support, that the money would most likely be coming from the Farm Bill, that getting money from, Medicare or something doesn't, that doesn't really make sense, or, it's just not how a government works. But that members of Congress can get behind this and can understand what we're talking about when we say, look, we should be investing in this because it makes sense and it can save us money. That was a reasonable approach. Other things, and Stephen, I think I'm going to ask you if you could give a summary of some of the discussion on the farmer interests.
Okay, so we have a lot of the farmers here, so help me out if I get this wrong. What I would say is the farms have a lot of history, okay? And we wanted to make sure we didn't repeat the same mistakes. And I want to be careful because I don't think it's mistakes so much as we don't want to repeat the things that have harmed farmers in the past, such as discounts at elevators, those types of things. So a lot of it was trying to think about all of the bad experiences that growers have had, and how do we make sure we adjust for those. And we came back with the concept that we have to align the value chain so that they know what's coming. They don't discount something, because, for those of you unfamiliar, protein in wheat is always a premium until you have too much of it, in which case then they dock you for protein and they pay for low protein. So a grower always gets this mixed signal as to what's valuable. And you can't be sending a mixed signal. At the same time, you want to make sure that growers have, a clear path that makes sense. We highlighted that arabinoxylan is a fiber you can't measure quickly. So we think one way of doing it is saying if you plant high fiber wheats, you sell them as high fiber wheats regardless of what happened afterwards. You've done the best you could. We don't know if there's going to be a lot of environmental variation on that, but we're going to do our best to make sure the farmer is protected so they don't get hurt by doing something for the good, you might say. And unfortunately, agriculture has a history of that, of harming people for that. What else am I missing on this? I was trying to, there was another idea popped in as I was discussing this and it already left. For the growers, we talked about that. We talked that we don't think there should be a downside to high fiber. I mean, there's no reason to dock it, okay? We talked that we have to do all the validation to make sure the value chains are in order, that the bakers can bake it, the millers can mill it, those types of things. We talked about clean labels because you can get fiber from other things like inulin, which is from the Jerusalem artichoke. But we don't want a bread label that says wheat, sugar, yeast, inulin, when you can simply say wheat, sugar, yeast, and the like, that kind of thing. Anything else that you can remember? In that case, we're going to pass it back.
I do want to share a little bit. The end of our exercise was to make sure that we had concrete, specific next steps that we can follow up with. So we don't just kind of have, oh, wonderful ideas, no, that we can follow through. And we talked about ideas related to government policy, export markets, resilience, the domestic market and next projects, the ideas around coordinating and a planful approach towards government policy. Got the most votes from the people in the room. That also aligning with the producers and the end users and the farm groups about export policy, not going off in a direction that's not in the direction of where the growers want to be going, received the most votes. And then beyond that, it went below that. So I think that we'll be able to have the process this, develop a draft of a policy and or a plan moving forward, and then be able to develop something aligned with that.
The other point that I meant to mention, we had quite a bit of discussion on is if you have an incentive and if you're successful, when you're successful, you no longer need the incentive. And so the question was, would it only be a transition payment? And that's why we wanted to link with the resiliency, because if we created all high fiber wheats, let's say we just did that and everybody was growing it, they'd say, well, it's a success. There's no reason to support that going forward. The resiliency issue of adding wheat into your rotations is something you do on an annual basis. So it's a way of extending that so that you could say, if you're going to do transition payments to get higher fiber wheat, and if you want to have wheat in rotations and the ecosystem benefits of it, can you extend and say, if you're going to get the ecosystem benefits, use the most nutritious wheat available. And we're assuming, again, no yield loss and the quality is all acceptable. And we have to validate all of that.
So that was the conversation that we had in our group, in this room, and Conrad and Marusha. Wait. Yeah, any questions? Yeah, good question. No, now it's Conrad and Marusha.
Thank you. I'll just sit here. That's okay. I have my notes on my computer. So we talked about health messaging, community education, and how to approach and reach underserved communities. So the first question that we were trying to answer was, what do you see as the biggest gaps in health messaging related to grain fiber? And we came up with there is limited clarity on the true impact on increased fiber on health and how to communicate this to diverse audiences. Also, lack of effective communication to young and young adults. So how do we leverage social media and social media influencers to effectively communicate this with broader audience, especially young folks? We came up with some TikTok solutions, and then a need for evidence-based messaging to establish the effectiveness of fiber per meat in addressing health and issues like diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And then the second questions we tried to answer was, what perception about grain fiber, food experience, and health do we feel like need to be prioritized in these next steps? So addressing concerns and misconceptions around genetically modified foods, and that this is not one of those cases, and challenging the perception that wheat is unhealthy. And then we also brainstormed on some approaches to reach underserved communities and stakeholders. And utilizing social media and leveraging those influencers is going to be one of the tools. Engaging community trusted advisors, cultural brokers, and influencers within those communities is going to be key. And then forming coalitions like this one for reaching individuals from all the ages. And then Dr. Conrad had some great questions too, if he wants to add anything.
I really appreciate you saying Dr. Conrad. That's what they actually call me in Africa all the time, my first name, which is kind of fun. But we have some great questions and some ideas. One of them was that if we have an event like this, we should have like a demonstration of like eating bread made from this kind of fantastic wheat, and then have like a taste test to see, can you tell the difference? Which one's which? And make it a public event that gets put out on TikTok and can engage people that are, hey, this, if you can't beat them, join them. Come on, TikTok's the way to go to do it, And then, so I thought that was a great idea. And we did get a lot of questions about, how can we prove that this type of fiber is like the other kind of fibers that are out there and then exactly why exactly does fiber actually help? What sort of detailed evidence is there? We'd like to have more systematic presentation of how that process works and why it results in that. And then is this fiber like the other fibers, saying? And so there was some discussion about that question, which I think is a challenge, saying? Because people have questions about health claims all the time. And there was some discussion that, hey, it used to be eggs were bad, now eggs are good, saying, sort of thing. So that's not so great. So just a question about the impact of it. We also talked about who isn't here, who should be here. I mean, who else would we want to have here? And I think someone suggested we should get like families with their kids to enjoy the food or have some part of that, make it a public thing that wouldn't just be us, other people that are just general community people, which should it might be kind of fun to have that. And then, well, what about other industry partners? I mean, I think there's lots of other commodity groups. We're talking about cotton, we're talking about rice. I mean, maybe not cotton, but we're talking about corn. Sorry, West Texas cotton sometimes sneaks in. Sorry, don't have it. Force a habit. Apologize. But it could also corn, soybeans. You could look at fruits and vegetables. You could look at different parts of it. Fruits and vegetables are a lot easier to change the characteristics. I was mentioning the fact that celery in Australia is a lot tastier than celery here. I suspect it has better stuff. So we could transform lots of types of food with this kind of concept. And the more people are thinking about, hey, and more make people aware of that they're have more agency, like you were talking about, how can we empower people as consumers, as medical consumers, to make better choices for themselves? That's better, so that was a part of our conversation to do that. And so, the whole idea is to kind of make, in a sense, kind of make a movement about it, I think, with some of the thoughts that there, and I think that's really part of what's been happening. But we had a good session. It was kind of weird because my Zoom's cut out like halfway through because we waited for like 20 minutes for it to come back. Anyway, so that's it's just interesting experience to cover that kind of technical problems. Anyway, I think that's the main points. Thanks for the opportunity to do this.
So thank you very much. Thank you all individually for coming, for spending the day, spending the time with us. Thank you very much to the Nebraska Wheat Board for making it possible. Thank you for the University of Nebraska Lincoln and UNMC for making everything possible. We will send out a short survey about what you liked, what you didn't like as a follow-up next week. If there's other questions, comments, concerns now or afterward is great. Any last things?
I guess I just wanted to add my thanks to all the speakers and the facilitators and the coordinators. I want to thank Connie Hansen, who is the individual who helped us with registration and getting the meeting set up. Susie, who is in Finland, actually was our event planner, and she did a spectacular job. I do want to add my thanks for all of you for taking your day to be here. And I know many of you took more than that because you had to drive in, and for which we're very gracious. I would also like to thank Inspire Media. They are the ones who handled all of our audio visuals. And I must admit, they have done far better than I've ever done at a meeting. So I know that they're professionals and I am not. So with that, is there anything else? I just, again, I want to thank you for your day. I hope you've had a good day. I hope you felt like it was worth your time. We do want to thank our sponsor now that Royce is back in the room. And so not to pick on you, Royce, but we do want to thank the Wheat Board for supporting this meeting, and we really are truly appreciative of that. Here, I'll give.
What I would say is I appreciate how you guys recognize the Wheat Board and you always pointed in my direction, but it's the actual board members. And we had 4 of those here today. So those are really the ones that are making this happen. So sure. We have Doug Hashman, Monty Merkel, Mary Eisenzimmer. Oh, and Tyson Nargis, he had to take off here just a little bit ago. So those are 4 of our 7 board members that were here in attendance, and they're the ones that really made this happen.
So let's give a round of applause to our Wheat Board. And in case there's any concern about the open meeting rules, we know no Wheat Board business was discussed during this meeting. You know, we just want to make sure we're street legal. With that, I think we're adjourned, are we not? Again, thank you ever so much for coming.